when I came to Brisbane, I met my husband and married and had 5 children. The marriage failed. So I had another 2 relationships and 2 more boys. And today I have 5 surviving children. One boy was 15 and died from sniffing glue, just so uncontrollable. I tried 12 months to curb that behaviour. Everything, bribery, everything. Tried everything, but psychologists, psychiatrists, even placing them in some of those properties. My cousins had racehorses, loved horses, but lasted about 3 months, then ran away. Just didn't, wanted to be his own person, but was only 15 at the time. And basically when they're that age, they tend to get into the wrong crowd and get involved in crime. Having worked in the penal courts for the last 4 years, there is that struggle for our mob, because now most of the Aboriginal services are saying you've got to prove who you are. And because we've been moved from country, from people, from families, they can't. I worked in the Brisbane Youth Detention Centre, and every second Aboriginal child I spoke to, so where are you from? And I don't know. I said, why don't you know? Well, I was raised in care. And so they've lost all connection, and it's heartbreaking. Well, I've recently started doing some sessions with probation and parole in Logan, and the first thing I need to impress on them is, if you're an Aboriginal male, what's your responsibility as an Aboriginal male? Not as a male, but as an Aboriginal male. What's your responsibility? And your first responsibility is to care for country. Oh, okay, now I get it. I'd love to go and do some gardening and, grow some bush tucker. And it's the connection in the first instance. And some of them just, oh yeah, okay, now I get it. But it's really the person themselves that picks it up and runs with it. If not, then, there's a lot more work to be done. Okay, so if you don't want to do bush tucker, bush medicine, care for country, learn, how to care for country, what do you want to do? There's always something. Art. You can tell your stories through art. Yeah. There's always other options that you can connect with your culture through those mediums. Yeah. There's always that opportunity. It's all out there. They've just got to learn how to access it, and sometimes they need to be supported to actually access those programs and things. When I've lost, 3 young people have died through, having connected with them through the family court. The court recommends that they go and do men's circles or men's business, or, sometimes the waiting time is 6 months. Now, what do they do in those 6 months? They're not getting any help, and their situation's becoming worse because they're not being supported. And so a lot of them 3 that I know have committed suicide because they just can't access anything, can't fit in, nobody's helping, and the family's not able to do it because they're not trained, to be counsellors, to be psychologists, they're not medical people. They're just trying to get by and support them the best they can. And so there's a big need for our men to be, supporting one another now. When I talk about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander men, I reflect on the incarceration rates. What have we got? 45% of the prison population is Aboriginal. It's almost every second person is an Aboriginal person. And having worked in the courts, I know that there are men sitting in jail who are there purely because they can't find a bail address. And it's the parole board that says whether or not that address is appropriate. Therefore, if you're not allowed to live there, then you're bailed, revoked, not supported. And through domestic violence, they end up in prison. And then when they're in there, they can't come back to the house they were because, it's not appropriate. The courts, the parole board deems it unsuitable. And so it's not a crime not to have a bail address, but they're still sitting in jail. And so, there's got to be something down the road that can be set up for them to be able to, go to a place and be rehabilitated and learn what it is to be a responsible male. None of them, you see the young kids today, they don't know what it is to be responsible. There's nobody teaching them responsibility. So I don't know. And it, while I worked in the detention centre, it was 80% Aboriginal and Torres Strait young people. And then, on top of that, we've got domestic violence, which is 45% of our women. Child protection's gone through the roof again. And I'm trying to work with some women to get their children back. And, the process of reunification is not being explained to some of our women. And so they'll contact me and say, well, I don't know why. I said, okay, then let's go through what's the reason the child was taken in the first place. So what have you done to address that? Have you signed up to any support groups? Have you got a job? Have you done any training? You've got to prove yourself worthwhile now to be able to raise your own child. You've got to have a home. You've got to have a job. You've got to have an income. You've got to have separate rooms, everything. It's, I remember, because I did child protection. I worked with the child protection service for 6 years. And I remember how sometimes we put our babies on the floor for them to learn how to crawl. Child protection had an issue with a baby sleeping on a mattress in the lounge room. So, what we see as suitable isn't always suitable in government's eyes. So it's a struggle. And there's a story about it, the bulldozing of the Yumba. They actually brought the bulldozers in and pushed over the shanties that were left standing. Well, she moved into the town area. She moved into a house up in Sophia Street, I think it was. Yeah. So the Yumba was shut down in 1968. She lived up in the town area. And I think it was late 70s, early 80s that she moved down to Brisbane. She went to live, first of all, I think she lived with my sister Peggy. Can't be too sure. But then she got a house in South Brisbane, Tribune Street. And then I was living with my, was it 6 or 7 children? When I was living at West End, 7 children, I applied for housing and I ended up with a house in Woodridge. And that was 1981. I moved out to Woodridge and I'm still there. Oh, I bought a house actually. Got a job. Stayed with the Department of Defence for 17 years. Wow. So, because I had children to raise and they had to be fed and clothed and everything else. So I made sure that I stayed in employment. So I think it was, I'm not sure, I think when I moved out to Woodridge in 81, that's right, it was the loss of my sister in 82. Mum came to live with me because then we had my sister's 2 boys to raise as well. So there's 9 children in the house. My 7 and my sister's 2. But then,
was your sister living in Mitchell as well?
No, she was living at West End. She had a partner, but that relationship broke down. She had 2 boys and a little girl, but she died in a car accident. She was all set to fly to Adelaide to the other sister Peggy. Went to a celebration and had a car accident on the way home, and so her and a 2-year-old daughter lost their lives. So that left the 2 boys without a mother. So Mum and Dad said they would take them and they came to live with me. And so Mum also looked after my children while I went to study as a legal stenographer. And I graduated in 82. And I think it was later on, Mum and Dad moved into a house in Runcorn because they had the boys and they got a house at Runcorn. I think they moved around a bit first. I know they were living at Newmarket, they were living at West End, they were living at... So, yeah, just moving around. And then they got a house at, it was 80s, late 80s. They moved into Runcorn. They had a house there, and then Mum got sick, and so she came to live with me in Sunnybank. I was living in Sunnybank at the time, and Dad was there for a while, but then when Mum passed away in, what year? I can't remember, 89 I think it was, and that left Dad in the house on his own, so he went and stayed at the hostel there at 8 Mile Plains. But it wasn't, because he was sort of hard to manage, let's say. Just wasn't coping, hard to manage, drinking. And my sister took him to the Aboriginal Hostel at 8 Mile Plains. He got sick. But you know what? It was nearly 10 years after my mother died. And he got sick and passed away. He died in the PA hospital. I can't remember. I think it was 2000, over 20 years ago. Yeah. But, you know, they were together basically all the time. Yeah. Where one was, the other one was. Yeah. It's a turnaround, isn't it? Because I hated school. And then when I married and had 7 children, I decided that I had to be responsible for providing for them. And so the only way I could do that was to get a decent job. And that's why I trained as a legal steno. Then I got a job with the Aboriginal Legal Service. Well, first of all, I did 12 months with Paul Richards' private firm. He was a principal solicitor for Aboriginal Legal Services. And then I transferred, I think Paul was moving office, and I transferred over to the Aboriginal Legal Service. I only did 3 years there because I wanted something more permanent, and, you know, the funding for the Aboriginal Legal Service was sort of annually, and I didn't want to be sort of left in the lurch without a job. So I joined the Department of Defence in 1986 and stayed there till 2001. I couldn't believe it. But I started my commerce degree in 2001 when I finished with the Department of Defence. Partner at the time got sick, so I had to give up studies. But that was in 2001. 2002, I think I was talking to a friend, and he told me about the Aboriginal courses in Macquarie Uni. And so I applied and I got in, and I did first of all I did the advanced diploma in community management. That was 2 years. But I wanted a degree. It wasn't structured there at Macquarie Uni at the time. So it was in Curtin University, Western Australia. So I applied for Curtin University, and I got accepted into Curtin University to do the degree program. So I decided I was going to start again from scratch, do the whole 3 years. But the travel was 5 hours one way and 5 hours, you know, it just sort of took up too much of my energy. And then in between that, Macquarie had structured their degree program. And so I decided I'd go back, and I only had to do 1 more year at Macquarie Uni. And so I graduated in 2007. And I'm at the ripe old age of 57. And a lot of people, you know, really can't believe. But it was what I don't know, I just took to it, because throughout those 3 years that I was there, I took out top student for 2 years. 2 years in a row. And I thought it was amazing, because for someone who didn't like school in the first place, actually, you know, warmed to it later on in later life. I've sort of, my passion then for the culture, for my culture then sort of took over. I had achieved my degree, but then I started, when I was with Department of Defence, I became the Queensland Secretary of the ATSI Veterans. Another first, you know. It's just a continued, what's the name? I was with ATSI Veterans. I was with, the Commonwealth Indigenous Network. I was secretary. And while I was there, we actually had network meetings for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people employed in the Commonwealth. And so while I was at the Department of Defence, I approached the OIC there and I said, do you mind if we have a meeting for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander members, Commonwealth staff members, in the mess, in the officers' mess? Because you had to be a certain level. You had to be an AO4 to be allowed into the mess, and some of us were only AO3. It was the first time AO3s were allowed into the officers' mess at Victoria Barracks there in Brisbane. Another first. So, you know, it was all about forging barriers. But it took me 10 years to get a promotion to an AO4. 10 years of applying and even doing higher duties and not having a reconsideration on any of my decisions. It still took me 10 years to get a promotion. And that was only because I made friends with a Australian guy who had lived in Darwin and had but worked with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Darwin in the community. And so he had that, not passion, but consideration, I suppose you can call it. So I made sure he was on the panel, and I also asked for an Aboriginal representative on the panel. And so those two supported, because there's only 3 people on the panel, and they both supported my application for an AO4. So it took me a long time, but I got there. See, it's about not giving up again. I was invited recently to do an acknowledgement for the Logan Foyer, which houses young people who are studying or working in an apprenticeship or a traineeship. And they did a report called Under One Roof. And I said, I did it earlier in the year, and when I came back for their report to be handed out, released, I said it resonated with me because having been raised in the Yumba and having so many people, I said my mother used to take in people, you know, just because they were passing through. So I said that resonates with me because we were all under one roof, basically. We'd taken anybody. And that's what I do. Like last year there was a Torres Strait Islander young fella who had nowhere to go. So I said, I've got room in the garage if you want to stay there. And he still comes back and visits me, you know. He's still connected to the family. He's a little boy. He's not little, he's 18, 19 now. But he's passionate. He's really thirsty for his Torres Strait Islander culture. And because I've lived the last 40 years with Torres Strait Islander partners, I can share some of that, but I can't talk on some male subjects. But he understands that, and recently he's been connected with a male person from the Torres Strait Islander culture. But he still, you know, comes out and spends time with us. Every time we have a function, he's there, you know, he comes out. Because while he was with me, he was desperate for a dreaming. I said, brother, I can't do it for you, but I'll tell you what, I'll identify you as a turtle. So, and he's connected, and so I've got in my glass cabinet, I've got a turtle. Whatever child I've got an owl and lizard and horse, and not a horse, kookaburra. I've got them all in the thing, and so I put the turtle in there. So now you're one of us. So, and that's why he keeps, you know, he's connected with us. It gives him connection, but he wants to further explore. So he's connected with the Torres Strait Islander male now, and that's better for him to be actually working with a Torres Strait Islander male. Someone who knows the culture from a male perspective.
Yeah. And that knowing the culture from a male perspective or a female perspective is pretty important.
Yeah. I can talk on some things because partners have been Torres Strait, and I've got a child who has Torres Strait Islander heritage. But I can't talk on male subjects, specifically around ceremonies and things like that. Right, general knowledge I can share with him, but around the ceremonies I don't even attempt. You know, because we do, you know, when on the anniversary of a person's death they do a tombstone opening. I know about those, but anything else? I know, sometimes young children don't have a haircut until they're 1. They're not allowed to cut the hair until their first birthday. Then their first shave is celebrated, the boys. But other than that, because I've been to these functions as a partner of a Torres Strait Islander male, I've attended quite a few cultural events. But I try to visit country every year because I have a responsibility to take my grandchildren back and give them their dreaming, and I'd rather do it on country. Yeah. Just went home recently, and I think I had, family members, like not necessarily my family, but Gunggari people themselves, who've never been to country. They contacted me and said, "Do you mind if we come with you?" I said, "It's your country too, brother, You come along." And so we had, three members of one family, 2 boys and a girl come along. And they're married and got kids. And so the 3 adults wanted their dreaming, and so it was handed out. I didn't do the men, but I did the female. And then they had children. And so the uncles then gave the children, because there were two boys, the uncles then were responsible to give the 2 boys. And they all went through in the one day, which was good. But it was, the downfall was it was really dry, and quite a few of us got bitten by ticks. So, yeah, and that's the worst thing. When it's really dry, they'll fall out anything and land on you. We're still taking ticks off my back when I got home. So I had to go to the doctors actually and get some antibiotic cream. Yeah, but yeah, and it's good because we have an opportunity to go and explore bush tucker, bush medicine, and bring some of those things with us so we can put it in our gardens or whatever, and grow it ourselves so we don't have to keep trekking. Yeah. But it's always a good excuse to go home. Yeah. And the Maranoa River is very dry at the moment, so that's another thing. You can't swim in it. And where the Yumba is, it's south of the sewage, like I said. There's a little gully, and I remember when I was at the house, we'd have to go down the gully and up the hill to the toilet. And the water that's coming from the sewage is all the way down. It's like they're calling it a lagoon now. I said, and there's ducks on the lagoon. But they're talking of the native title body. They're talking of putting a filtering system in, using that water to, keep the grass growing around the Yumba there. Oh. And while we were there was a group of 20 students from Western Australia, part of the RAW program, RAW. I don't know what it stands for, but they came over and they just did a little bit of cleaning up. They constructed a bough shed where it's a replica of the gambling school where all the women used to sit under the bough shed and play cards. So they built that while they were there. They've done a few little bits and pieces. The thing that sort of piqued my interest was there's no culture being taught to them while they're on country. Yes, they're just there to do this, but not engage in any cultural activities. And so, I said, well, we're going to do a dreaming ceremony. Feel free to come along and watch, engage, sit down and talk. And of course they were too shy. They're only students. So the next morning at breakfast, I walked over and sat myself at the table and had a good yarn with them and said, where do you come from? What are you doing? Do you know why you're here? And, the stories about this place. You're on sacred land here. Learn about it. There's a museum there. Go upstairs and have a look at it and, learn more about this country. And then you have more to talk about other than...
There is a museum there.
Yeah, it's up on the Yumba. It's the old school. They brought it back.
Oh, they brought it back
They
from...
brought it back from the Mitchell State School and left it on the Yumba there.
Oh, right.
Yeah, because Aunty Irene Ryder, she petitioned. Because when they built the new home science building at the Mitchell State School, or the high school, they wanted to demolish it. And she said, no, that belongs on country because it's where all our Aboriginal students, our Aboriginal kids went through that school when it was on country.
Right.
And because the government wanted a building, they took the building up and used it as a home science building. But she petitioned and got it back, so now it's turned into a museum.
And
Which is
anyone
good.
can visit that museum? Is it a...
Yeah, there's a caretaker there, a caretaker on country now, I believe, and you just have to ring up the Gunggari. Proud to be Gunggari, I think it's all managed through. Yeah. Proud to be Gunggari website, Facebook page.
Oh, yes, I was looking at that.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's quite a lot. I mean, the people that I went home with, they'd never been to country before. And there was one guy that came all the way from South Australia, never been to country before. So a bit of an eye-opener for him. You know, I'm glad we were able to do some cultural ceremony while they were there to sort of witness and understand the importance of these things. Because it's
So which cultural ceremonies do you do?
the dreaming ceremony.
Oh, do
Yeah.
you do the smoking?
Yes, we did the smoking. So when we go home,
Excuse me.
it's a practice of ours when we go back to country to witness the first sunrise. And so we'll get up and we'll go to the highest point we can find and sit and wait for the sun to come up. And just have a few words and say, you know, thank you. Thank the spirits for allowing us to be here, and I hope that we're protected and guided while we're here and nothing, you know, untoward happens. So just have a little bit of a ceremony, a little bit of a talk. But to witness the sun come up is special. On the first day you're on country. Always the first day you're on country, witness the sun come up. Don't do it the next day. Do it the first day. And the other thing is, before we actually go on to the Yumba, because it's sacred land, we either go through water or we go through smoke. And because it was so dry and whatever, we chose water. Just grab a spirit bush, a sandalwood, and splash the water over it to signify you've cleansed yourself. So you're not taking any bad spirits or bad energies onto sacred land. That's a practice of ours. You know, that's something that I grew up with, and I keep that, you know, within the family. I teach the grandkids that this is what is part of our culture. Having sort of travelled a bit, spirituality's not really important to a lot of our mob. And it's up to the elders to revive that, to start going back and talking about spirituality. Because in our, how do I say it, history, in our belief, we believe that the spiritual ancestors placed us here to care for the land. And that we have to honour them by acknowledging them and also continuing those practices and continuing to hand down, you know, to the next generation the practices that we've learnt. And I was discussing with this woman today about childbirth, and she said, how did the women know? I said, well, most of our stuff, women's stuff, coincides with the moon, the lunar cycles. You know, that's something that it's not widely known, particularly for our Aboriginal women. I know that as my totem, the Gunggari totem through my grandmother is the emu, and I know that the constellations, there's an emu in the constellations. If I can see the legs of the emu, then I'm not allowed to take the eggs. If I can't see the legs, I can't take the eggs because they're nesting. But if I can see the legs, I know they're moving around and I can go and take eggs. But if you touch them with your hands, the human smell is, the emus are very sensitive, so tend to desert the nest if they can smell. Yeah, so you get a stick and leave 2 in the nest and take the rest. Another one my father taught me. And so, yeah, it's interesting. There's a book just been put out now, The First Explorers. No, The First Astronomers. The First Astronomers. And it's about how we, managed the land by the astronomy certain times. And I've worked with CSIRO, and CSIRO have put out a calendar of events around, the right time to fish, the right time to hunt, and what not to hunt, and all that sort of stuff. And I've got a host of them at my house, and I sort of, that's okay for the Northern Territory, but what about here? We need to have something that's local to Queensland. And that's what it's all about, the cultural practices, traditions, customs. So we can't lose them. We've got to keep learning them and keep handing them down. And that's why I commit to, teaching my younger generation the importance of connecting to culture. And if I can help anybody, any Aboriginal young person find their way, then, that makes my heart glad.